we have convened a small group of senior nurses of TNA District 9 for the purpose of sharing our history, our memories, our recollection, and maybe a little reminiscing about what was important to us with District 9 and our membership. This, of course, is in conjunction with our celebration of our 100th anniversary Jubilee, which is September 12th. September 12th, 1916, TNA, it was TGNA at the time, District 9 was founded. And we are building on that history. So, my name is Shirley Morrison. I am the lead for this Jubilee program, and part of that will involve, or is involving, sharing experiences from colleagues who are longtime members and have lots of interesting stories. I joined TNA in, I think, 1966 when I graduated with my baccalaureate at TWU. And currently, I'm enjoying retirement and volunteering with TNA as well. I'd like to go ahead and introduce the rest of my group here.
I'm Dorothy Otto, and I'm glad you mentioned TGNA because I have the little Texas star on my bracelet. I joined TNA, TGNA in 1954 when I graduated from my BSN program, and professional organizations were very important.
My name is Joanne Monroig. I've been with Texas Nurses Association since 1990 or 91. It's kind of hard to remember back that far. And it's really done a lot for me professionally. I'm retired now, but I did work for 25 years on the same nursing unit. And that seems kind of hard to believe that you're a staff nurse and you stay in the same position. But we had the same head nurse for the 25 years. So it was a rather unique experience.
Hi, good morning. My name's Lea Ann Lightfoot. I'm an assistant clinical professor with the University of Houston, and I joined TNA in what I think was 1990. I came here from New York, and when I was in New York, I worked at Bellevue Hospital, and as a requirement for employment, I was required to be part of the union. So I belonged to Houston Health and Hospitals Corporation. The union did not meet or exceed my professional expectations, so when I got to Houston, I was looking for a different type of organization to be a member of, and that's when I joined TNA, and it's been a wonderful journey and experience with TNA over the years.
I'm Phyllis Waters, and I'm a professor at the University of St. Thomas here in Houston. And I joined TNA sometime in the mid-70s. I came to Texas from Georgia and came here for graduate study, and got very active in TNA. And I was a very young nurse when I came here, and TNA really influenced my formative professional years in some significant ways that I can recall have lasted through working in 5 states and multiple professional roles. And so it was a powerful influence on me at that time. And I'm glad to be here with some old friends.
Well,
I'll go back and add
Dorothy, would you?
I am retired, but I am guest teaching. I retired last year, but I do guest teaching at UT School of Nursing in Houston, and was recognized with emeritus status, so that helps.
Yes.
Yes. Anybody else like to start with a particular recollection? I'll start maybe. I, for many years, served as the editor, or the editor really, of the District 9 newsletter. At the time, one time it was called The Capsule. We were able to change that and change our logo back in, it was when Betts Anderson was president. I would say in the 80s, I think 1980, 81. And Betty Gregory, who was one of our active members at the time, a school nurse, designed that logo that we currently use. Still use it. You know, in my experience with the Advocate was, obviously, it's evolved considerably, but it gave me confidence to apply to another professional organization, to a national Oncology Nursing Society editorial board, to be the editor, a part of the board of editors for their newsletter. And I was accepted, and I was absolutely, you know, elated, and I know that was because of my experience with TNA. So.
You mentioned a name that I'm familiar with, Betsy Anderson. She was one of my faculty at Texas Women's University when I was getting my master's, and she was a wonderful role model and mentor, and she was also very involved with Texas Nurses Association, along with Terry Throckmorton, another name, just wonderful women, really leaders in nursing and really advanced and promoted the nursing profession. So they had a lot of impact on me, as other members of TNA did. Early on in my career, I crossed paths with Robert Blake, and that kind of planted a seed and developed a wonderful professional relationship. And he's past president of Texas Nurses Association. So early on, I had no idea how important those relationships were going to be as I move forward. And as faculty member of University of Houston, I continue those relationships, and we have a very strong relationship with TNA, advancing health through education.
Well, my influence probably during the presidential part was Mary Ashley, Dr. Ashley, because prior to that I was involved in the Texas League for Nursing, and I couldn't balance both. But Mary Ashley and I were, well, she was president, I was on the board, and I was also treasurer. And just kind of a unique aside, while treasurer, we had this single plot, cemetery plot, and we were always trying to sell it, but we were not successful. But I mean, that kind of hung over me to do something with the cemetery plot. But TNA has been so good, District 9 particularly, to me, in relationship to students. I've taught for 56 years, and it's always been on the forefront to encourage the students of today, which is very difficult, beyond maybe a clinical specialization. But I have made a difference in some of the mentees that I've had as faculty. In fact, two are on board positions now. And so I've had a lot of gratitude working with them as a role model. And but it's been my preference, and it's been my pleasure and somewhat of a passion to be involved with the students for today, but certainly in the past. So I do know it can make a difference, and I know I have made a difference in some of their lives, to know the significance of your professional organization.
Absolutely. And I think I came into TNA as a student, coming right into TNA, and one of the first things I did with District 9 is I was on the nominating committee and the planning committee for Nursing Celebration 1991, the very, very first one. And I worked with a wonderful woman by the name of Marie Parsons, and she led our committee, and it was great. And Marie asked me to introduce our MC of the event, which was Shara Fryer from Eyewitness News. And Shara was just darling and wonderful and articulate and pretty, and I said, I need to introduce her. I had a little panic attack, got in my car, drove to the Galleria, bought a pretty little dress, went home and wrote a little speech, and got up in front of hundreds of nurses. And I was so honored to be a part of that. I introduced Shara Fryer, and we launched off an event which has become a tradition in Houston, the Nursing Celebration, and that was just phenomenal, and it was a wonderful experience, and I was very honored to be a part of that.
First one.
First one.
First one.
I can
Yeah,
appreciate
first
it.
one. And you know, we just celebrated our 25th.
We've celebrated our 25th.
That's right.
Isn't that great?
Phenomenal. Joanne, do you have any recollections about career fair? Career fairs, sponsored
Career
by,
fairs.
or whatever your other. You were
Um,
instrumental in that.
Yeah, I remember when Anna Valadez, she wasn't in our area, but she was at the meeting. I don't know why. And she came up to me and she asked me if I wanted to be on the professional services committee at TNA. And I said, oh my gosh, what do I have to do for that? So I said, sure. And it was really a great experience being on a state committee. We did a lot of statewide survey of nurse satisfaction, and we served several years so we could get that tallied and give the report. And then we went from the Professional Services Committee to form COWI, which is the Council on Workplace Issues. And that was really exciting that time too. And career fair. We did a lot with career fairs.
Yes, you did.
Did.
And students appreciated it.
Oh,
That's good to know.
started back, I guess, in the early 90s. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was the main moneymaker.
It was a main revenue generator
Yeah.
for District 9, yes.
But had a great time doing it. We had most of the time over 100 vendors and schools of nursing. It was financially, it was pretty stable for us. We earned quite a bit of money. And it was great for networking. The students could talk to faculty. And they could talk to people who wanted to hire them. So it was really an interesting thing for me to do.
At the Marriott on Braeswood.
Oh, yes, I remember going
Yes.
there.
Yes.
Is the Marriott still there on
No,
Braeswood?
it's
It's
not.
long gone.
It's gone.
Okay.
No, that was really an important part of your giving back to TNA District 9, because it meant so much to the students. I saw that they attended because I was teaching professional issues, but all in all, they really did have that opportunity for networking and talking with others
Getting acquainted.
and seeing other students.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, several years of success with the career fair that TNA sponsored. And of course, we've kind of evolved, and we realized at a point that was not sustainable. But it certainly was at the time, and in the 90s it was a big deal. How about you?
Well, as we all have memories of how we were personally affected by TNA, but I also recall how TNA exerted its leadership, TNA 9 exerted its leadership in the community of nursing in Houston, as the community of nursing was evolving along with the Texas Medical Center. And as I said, my early days, I was in graduate school and involved in a number of things, and concurrently involved in the feminist movement. And so one of the things that happened was there was a confluence between a lot of the consciousness raising nationally around women's rights and how that impacted nurses in the workforce. And so I had the privilege, and one of the things that I think is probably interesting is kind of what was happening within the context of the mid-70s. It was a time of consciousness raising around women's issues. It was a time when we had the effort to initiate the Equal Rights Amendment for women in this country. And it was also a time when there was a realization that nursing that traditional nursing roles between physicians and nurses was breaking down, because people were beginning to recognize that healthcare was far more dependent on nurses than society had ever credited that dependency to be, and that nurses played a far more central role in the delivery of quality health care. So it was an interesting time to be active in TNA, because all of these things were, as I said, coming together at the same time. So at that particular time, we had a very, for those of you who have been around long enough to remember, and I'm looking at Dr. Ott when I say, and Shirley, okay. Dixie Brown was our executive director, and she had a lot of energy and a lot of ideas, and she was a very assertive and professional woman, and she was able to help facilitate those of us. I was a member of the board during that period. And so one of the things that we did that got a lot of attention for TNA and actually helped establish TNA as an advocacy group for nurses in the Houston area was we sponsored a conference in 1976, October of 1976, and it was entitled Nurse Power. And it had to do with raising the consciousness of nurses who attended relative to their role and its importance, not that they didn't know it, but in the same way that the feminist movement was raising women's consciousness about how they needed to assert themselves, not only for their own well-being, but for the well-being of people they served. Because when you cannot assert yourself as a nurse effectively, actually the patients are the ones who do not do well. So we put together this conference and brought in a high-powered speaker from New York, Shirley Smoyak, who had been making a lot of, do you remember Shirley?
Yes, I remember Shirley.
Yes.
She spoke in our program.
Yeah, and she was not timid at all in terms of identifying the issues that concerned nurses and the appropriate role for nursing. We had a huge turnout. As I recall, we had something like 350 people, and somewhere in Midtown Houston. I couldn't tell you where right now. I was a member of a group, the core group, along with Mary Guidry, Carolyn Blass, and Doreen Wise. And working with Dixie Brown, we organized this piece on nurse power. And it was amazing to us because, as I said, it was such a socially topical issue at that time that we got a lot of attention. They covered us from the Houston Chronicle. They did a big piece on us. We had contact with a women's advocate in the mayor's office. And before it was over, I think people knew that the Texas Nurses Association District 9 saw as one of its roles to advocate for nurses as a community, but nurses individually. And what we saw as a result of that was on many occasions, and in some situations I don't think would be appropriate to reveal, we got called into some workplace issues where nurses were, not being treated well, and also some of them who were actually being sexually harassed. And so the nursing community began to see the Texas Nurses Association as a force for moving our profession into its appropriate role in advocating for patients and being recognized as a professional on par with other healthcare professionals.
Very good.
Yeah, phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah.
How, if we reflect on it,
Yes.
how our experiences, molded us
Yes.
and gave us confidence, to speak,
Yeah.
to share, and in a variety of ways. And I think, Phyllis, you raised a good point about recognizing our colleagues and recognizing the nurses. We have evolved now into our nursing celebration.
Yes.
And we recognize 20 outstanding nurses each year. And it's become, something that we look forward to, and that we look back on and say, oh my gosh, what wonderful examples, of nursing leadership, that we have been able to share.
It's so important to implement reward and recognition in our profession, and to move nurses forward into the media, get our names out there, and educate the public about what nurses really do. And I think we nurses work very, very hard, and the reward and recognition, I think, is just essential to continue to promote nursing as a profession, especially as we have more nurses with advanced degrees.
I owe a big thank you to District 9 because I was in the 1992 class for nursing celebration. And then also, previous to that, was recognized for Educator of the Year in District 9. So, well, you know, being employed in professional nursing for 60 years gives you a little credibility. Yeah, thank you, Shirley.
A lot of credibility.
But no, I concur with you, Lea Ann, about the recognition. And I remember when it started in 1991, yes. And what it's come to be today, 25 years later. So it's so important for us to certainly recognize those individuals. But I have to ask Phyllis, where were you in about 1976 when they were picketing out in front of St. Luke's? Because I would look at my office, and there they were carrying picket signs. Mm-hmm. And we were a right-to-work state as we are now. And I thought, well, that gives me some food for thought in teaching about politics, because I would walk into the classroom carrying a picket sign with my cap on, which I hadn't worn many years. But I have to, it was a teaching moment.
Well, that was and that was the thing I was trying to focus on, Dr. Ott, was the business of, it was a very powerful time for women and nursing, and TNA was in the forefront of that. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't picket at St. Luke's, but I did march for the ERA. If you remember, they had a big, the 1977 International Conference was here, and there were a lot of Texas nurses marching for the ERA, and all the, I don't know if any of you recall, but all the living and former first ladies came to that big effort. And so I marched in that proudly with my mother. And so even though we were not successful, we made a statement about the role of women, and the role of women for many years, and the role of women in the future. And I thought it was really important. And there were a lot of Texas nurses in that international conference on women, and we were well represented. So that was the group that I was picketing with.
Well, I just remembered that the Teachers Federation and the Texas Medical Center Laundry Association were wooing the nurses.
Yes, they were. That was the time when that was all happening.
That just wasn't my territory.
No,
so
we weren't. TNA never really. There was a lot of talk about bargaining units, but we never. We really always wanted to advocate. One of the things that I recall, if you do at that time, is we saw ourselves as an advocacy group rather than a bargaining agency. And one of the things that I thought we did pretty well was workforce advocacy without the union structure.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
I think helped us do that without
without the conflict. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're still doing advocacy today.
Yes, we are.
Directed toward our patients, and it's a strong behavior.
Absolutely.
Well, it's a part of our professional formation, and I think that was a period in where we were becoming to recognize nurses had always been advocates. Florence Nightingale was one of the most famous, but we were learning how to be effective public and social advocates in this country in that time. And I think that's an ongoing challenge. How are we effective 21st century advocates. And I think we have been, certainly at the national level and at the state level, in terms of healthcare reform and advocating for the welfare of patients. And I think probably one of the most powerful things I have read in a very long time is the new Code of Ethics for Nurses that was recently published, in which we formally said that to follow the ethical principles for nursing, you must advocate for social justice for all people. And I think that that is a unique professional stand for any group, and I think we're probably the only healthcare group that has that formally in their code of ethics. I'm not sure. Is that true, do you think?
I don't know. I'm familiar certainly with the 2012 revision of the Code of Ethics, which every student gets a copy.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We have much to be grateful for our national organization,
Yes, yes,
but also down to the
yes,
individual
yes, absolutely.
regarding our Code of Ethics.
I wanted to add, just, this reminds me of, maybe all of us have participated in Nurses Day at the Capitol,
Yes.
or legislative committees that at the local level and at the state level, and is another way that our organization kind of impacts us, is gives us word, gives us voice to talk to our state representatives about healthcare, you know, and educate them, as well as be aware of what the needs are and what the nursing issues are, you know, for legislation. And we all have memories of going to Austin, right? And how that impacted.
I think the Texas Board of Nursing and the Texas Nurses Association have been the most effective collaborative group for nursing. I think they're a role model for the United States. I have had a chance to speak at the National Council of State Boards, and I can tell you at that in that arena, Texas is well respected. I mean, we are, you know, the work that has been done, the legislative work by TNA, which starts at the district level and goes all the way to the state level, and then it is done collaboratively on behalf of the board, is phenomenal.
I just want to, in my part, in the significance of nursing celebration and the silent auction for nursing scholarships. I think that is so important, and it's a fun time for everybody. And I'm glad you mentioned Florence Nightingale, because there are few of us that are devotees of Florence. But I've had a lot of pleasure and gratitude for framing Florence Nightingale international stamps. But the key issue is that I'm contributing to scholarship funds for students, graduates, etc. So,
And research awards.
yes, and so I commend the Nursing Celebration for that silent auction.
Very important.
Piece, yes. Yes, and you know, of course, our awarding of scholarships goes back pre-celebration. I mean, that is a tradition that District 9 has had for many years, maybe since the founding.
I was on the scholarship committee for about 4 years. And you are right about the research.
Yeah, research as well. Any other final words anybody would like to?
It's been an honor to be here today with all these bright, articulate leaders in nursing, and I hope this is something that we can do time and again. Maybe we create a tradition with this, and every year get some of our nurse leaders together to reminisce about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. It's important to remember our history in nursing, and it's really important to recognize everyone's contributions. Thank you. I'm just honored to be a part of this today.
Thank you.
Great, and I appreciate everybody's contribution and look forward to more times to share.
Come teach a lecture at my school.
Thank you.